Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to the Hearthstone Weekly Show. Now, before we get started, I have an important announcement to make, which is tomorrow, that's Friday, I'm running a limited tournament. The voting did finish, it ended up being limited about 60%. So, yep, I'm doing a limited tournament tomorrow, and if you're on NA, there is also a North American limited tournament running. Now, there aren't any prizes for the EU one. It's just supposed to be a casual tournament if you want to come and play. Kind of like the Mana Grind tournaments used to be. Just come and play, have fun. As far as the NA one, though, that is with a prize, as far as I know. I think it's $25, and that will be streamed as well, at least the finals. The finals and semis will be streamed and casted by the same guys who did the More Meat Invitational. So, yeah, the NA one's a bit more serious, but the idea is you can get into the format if you want to, so if you just want to come and play a tournament with some people, just go for it. It's aiming to be a bit more of a fun event as opposed to super serious as most tournaments have been nowadays. But anyway, so for this week, or episode, I don't even know why I call this weekly anymore, it's kind of random, my schedule of releasing these, but anyway, I'm going to be going over 5 decks which me and my teammate Brammer, in particular, you've seen him on Versus Series a few times, just tested out. We spent about 2 hours just testing limited decks so that I could put them on a video, because, well, obviously most people do not have teammates to test decks with, and in the case of limited, no one's played limited in about a year, so I thought I'd make this video to kind of keep people informed if they want to play in tomorrow's tournaments. So anyway, we've got 5 here, including 2 that are basically standard decks that have been edited to be limited, and the other 3 are decks that are created by limited. And we'll go over some of the skeleton lists and then tech cards. I'm doing a bit different to my deck techs recently. I'm doing a bit more like my deck techs used to be when I just did them with slides. You'll see what I mean when I get started. So we'll start with Zoo. Now, I've got 3 cards open here. So the core of Zoo is fairly well defined. Now this particular one has Tech Void Terror in it. It's a Demon Zoo list with Void Callers, Doom Guards, things like that. The rest is pretty standard. Double Power Overwhelming to enable Nervian Eggs, and Detect Iron Beak Owl, because silence is a very, very important asset nowadays. Besides that, list is pretty standard. Now you do have 3 cards open. The 3 cards open is basically Boom and Loatheb and Mal'Ganis. Those are where the 3 cards in this particular list come from. So the question is, you've got to edit it. So how do you edit it? Now, a couple different ways you can do this. You could consider running Demon Wrath and things like that, or something silly. Not that Demon Wrath's silly, but just something crazy. Now, in terms of late game demons, if you really want to, if you're expecting a lot of Hunter, a Dread Infernal can go a long way. If you really want to try it out, don't laugh, it actually might work. A Floating Watcher, similar story, because keep in mind the biggest thing in this format is usually about 6-6 or 7-7. Generally, the size of things in this format are actually bigger than in standard, and you'll see what I mean when I get there, with a couple exceptions like Ragnaros, for example. But you've got a couple late game demons here which you can run. Keep in mind you can't run the legendaries. However, in terms of smaller minions to go into the deck, you've got Argent Squire as a potential for a bit of extra abusive Sergeant potential right there. Couple things you can try in Acidic Swampoos if you're expecting a lot of hunters, and there's also a deck which I'm not showcasing, but Warrior Grim Patron is still a deck, so you may want a Acidic Swampoos to deal with those Grim Patron warriors. You run a second Direwolf Alpha as a potential tech card, second Iron Beak Owl, things like that. Now you can also run a bit of a higher curve. You can get some Dark Iron Dwarves in there. You're already running Defender of Argus, Void Caller, but you can get a Shredder as well if you really want to go for that. Maybe even an extra 5-drop, go for a Bomb Lobber or a Sludge Belcher or something crazy if you really want to go for the upper end curve. Now, the last card I want to talk about in terms of tech cards is actually Draconic Crusher. Now, having looked at the format quite extensively, Draconic Crusher, when activated, is the single biggest thing in the entire format. It just is. And it's a 6-mana 9/9 if it's active. Now you're playing an aggro deck, which means maybe you can get the 6-mana 9/9 active, and only a couple classes can deal with it effectively. So maybe Draconic Crusher is something, sorry, not Draconic, Draconid. I've been getting this wrong since the card came out, actually. I got it wrong in the spoiler and the set review. and now I'm getting it wrong here. But anyway, so Draconid Crusher is a very powerful threat if it's activated. If it's not active, it's just worse than Boulder Fist if you want to go for that kind of route, and it's just worse than a lot of other 6-drops. So if you're playing an aggressive deck and you get this active, it's very powerful. Nope, I don't want to finish that automatically. Now, the second list I'm going to talk about, I'll just go over the two that are transferred from Standard. Now, this is Hybrid Hunter. Now, you may notice that this is 30 out of 30 cards. This is because this is Hybrid Hunter with Boom taken out. No, not Boom. Loatheb taken out. And then extra Unleash put in, I think. So basically, Hybrid Hunter can be run entirely. So for anyone who hasn't seen Hybrid Hunter, or has been living under a rock, or whatever, basically Hybrid Hunter is a mix of Face Hunter and mid-range. So you run Face Hunter elements like Glaive Zuka, Leperno, Wolf Rider, Arcane Golem, but you also run Shredders, Hymanes, 2 Unleashes, things like that. Freezing Traps instead of Double Explosive. Now this particular list is a bit greedy, where it's running 2 traps, not 3, so your scientists are a bit dead sometimes, and only 1 quick shot, things like that. 1 bow, so you got 2 Glaive Zuka. But while the list looks complete, there's still a couple tech cards you can talk about. Now, the first thing is if you want to change this into a mid-range list, you do have access to tracking for some sort of more reliable mid-range list if you want to. You got Hunter's Mark, deal with the taunts, which may be relevant because Druid has some ridiculous taunt decks in Limited. So you may need Hunter's Mark, you may need a second Iron Becal to even have a chance of beating those decks. And you'll see what I mean when I get to the Druid deck, which I've got thrown together. Just because you can build a deck from Standard does not mean it's the best deck in the format, because the format itself warps, and as a result the deck's matchups change, and it may not be a tier 1 deck in Limited, whereas it is in Standard, because it's not just a power level difference. The main thing is Big Game Hunter is gone, so a lot of unplayable cards become very powerful. So things like Draconid Crusher, for example, and a couple of the Druid cards and such. Now, in terms of other cards for Hunter, you got the ever-present Explosive Trap, second Quick Shot, second Bow, 1 Glaive Zuka. That's always something you can tinker around with. I've seen people running 1 Unleash, and you can fit in a Kez and Mystic if you're expecting a lot of Hunters. And you can even go more mid-rangey with Houndmasters. I picked Hybrid Hunter to showcase because it's something where you can show the middle zone and then kind of show which cards you can go on which side of things. So for Face Hunter, you can go more heavy into direct damage with 2 bows and explosives and quick shot and things like that. Whereas if you're going for more mid-rangey styles, you can first of all get 2 Iron Becals in both sides of Hunter. If you're not going for Hybrid Hunter and you're kind of squeezed for space, I would recommend playing 2 Iron Becals. You really need them right now. In terms of 3-drops, there isn't really much to add in. You do already have a lot of 3-drops in Hybrid Hunter and Face Hunter, but when it comes to mid-range, you may have a couple issues in the 3-drop section. Now, the other card I want to talk about, besides Belcher, obviously, for mid-range, is always an ever-present card, as I failed to find Belcher. Where is Belcher? There he is. Okay. Belcher is always an ever-present card. Now, Draconid Crusher comes up here as well as Zoo, because what's more aggressive in terms of HP totals than a Hunter? Yeah, so running 3 Hymanes seems fairly standard in mid-range Hunter. Just replace Boom with Draconid Crusher, and you've got your extra late-game punch. So I would highly recommend trying out Crusher if you're just running straight mid-range Hunter, which some people might, because a lot of people don't like playing Face Hunter. So if you're playing Hunter and you want to try mid-range, go for Draconic Crushers, or I'm just going to call them Crushers, okay? I can't get it right. I'm just going to call them Crushers. Go for Crushers. They're very, very powerful for the mana cost if you get the active trigger. Now, I've got 3 more deck lists here. Now, these are deck lists which me and Brammer came up with. Well, they're not the entire list, but the archetypes that we kind of tinkered around with while testing. Now, the first thing is a Paladin Dragon mid-range control. I don't even know what to call this. Basically, I thought, okay, so the most prevalent decks are going to be aggro. For better or for worse, people, when they think commons and rares, they think aggro. So there's going to be a ton of aggro. So what I did was I thought, well, maybe Dragon Paladin can compete in a format that doesn't run Thorazan and Sylvanas and things like that, and just high-powered cards. So what I did was I threw together a standard Paladin core with Knife Jugglers, mini-bots, 1 Zombie Chow, 1 Iron Becal, Muster, Aldor, 4 drops, Shredders, get a bit of extra mid-game control, and then I thought, alright, let's add a bit more of a controlling shell. So I've got Wild Pyro as a one-off, but it can go up to 2. I would recommend running 1. Equality can go up to 2. That's one of the tech cards you can add in. And then a Dragon section. Now, you can run Blackwing Technicians. I'm not in my lists in general. Well, depends. I might do a bit of extra testing before the tournament itself. But Blackwing Technician I haven't been trying out because you already have Muster, Aldor, and a lot of 2-drops. You don't need a 3-drop as much, and you don't run as many dragons as normal, so it's a bit hard to get the trigger. Now, Blackwing Corruptor, one of, because some people run 1, however, you can run the 2 if you like. I would recommend running 2, it's a very, very powerful effect, but 1 is the core of the deck. Now, the rest of the dragon slots are interesting because you can run 2 Volcanic Drakes if you like. If you're running 2 Equalities, I would recommend running 2 Drakes because it means you get more board clears and more mana off your Drakes. You can run 2 Azure Drakes, which I would highly recommend. Makes up for lay on hands, draw a lot. Another tech card you can run is Solemn Vigil. With Wild Pyro, it's actually very effective as a one-of. I would not recommend running 2, but as a one-of, it's very handy. And Draconic Crusher comes up here, but this deck is a lot slower, which means that Volcanic Drake is in general better. Or if you want a 6-drop, you can run Boulder Fist or even Frost Elemental. Yeah, people forget about the Frost Elemental, but Frost Elemental is surprisingly effective when your opponent doesn't have legendaries, because legendaries are the ones with persistent effects, whereas Frost Elemental shuts down just straight up attacking threats for an entire turn. Now, the last card I want to talk about here that's significant is Guardian of Kings. Now, I've got him as a one-of in the core. I would maybe say running 2 is okay. Now, the reason Guardian of Kings is a lot better is because 5/6 is still large. It's still large and in charge, like it is in standard. Still average. It's still way above average in terms of size of things on the board. However, not by as much as in standard. Where in standard, the biggest thing on the board is usually a 5/5. In limited, the biggest thing is usually a 6/6, which is +1/+1, but it actually does matter. So Guardian of Kings is in here because healing. You can run him for healing, you can run anti-heal for healing, make up for the lack of lay on hands, run a ridiculous amount of healing, and you can really run a control paladin. You can go full late game. You've got Guardian of Kings as a 7-drop. You've got a lot of extra controlling aspects. You can go full late game paladin if you so wish. Now, besides that, there is the ever-present Blessing of Kings for a bit more of an aggressive one, because Blessing of Kings is surprisingly effective when you need an extra punch. And Hammer of Wrath, almost forgot about this. Now, Hammer of Wrath is a card which I'm very, very fond of in a Paladin deck that needs a bit more draw and utility, which it does, and with Azure Drake being a 2-of in the deck, it actually does 4 and draws when you have a Drake on the board, which is incredible. So Hammer of Wrath is also a very nice one to look at. Not core, but nice to look at. Now, I'll leave Priest till last, because that's going to take a while to talk about, a lot to talk about with Priest. Now, Druid. There are 2 ways to play Druid, as far as I can tell. One of them, in my opinion, is bad, and the other one is good. Now, the one that I think is bad is Token Druid, because you don't have Force of Nature. You just have Savage Horse. So you can run Token Druid, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's just not that good. Now, the list I've thrown together here is the basis of a ramp deck. 5 cards left for teching, but this is the base of a ramp deck. 1 Zombie Chow, can go up to 2. Standard ramp. Flames, kind of important here against aggro. 2/5 for 3 is very powerful in this format, so you need the Druid of the Flames. Swipe, Keeper, Druid of the Claw, Belchers, that's all normal. Shredders for a bit of extra mid-game punch, you need a 4-drop. You could run Sengens if you really want to be bulletproof against aggro. It might be overkill, but you can run Sengens. I got my golden ones from Rogue, I think. Rogue 60? Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, you can run Sengen. And in terms of the late game, you've got 2 of the most powerful late game cards in the entire format. Mech Bear Cat and Volcanic Lumberer. And no, I am not joking. So, you also have access to Ironbark if you really want extra taunts. I think it's overkill, but it might be worth testing a 1-of Ironbark, and you have 3 massive late game taunts. 3 taunts with 8 health. That's nuts. The only thing bigger than these are basically active Draconic Crushers, and you can run a lot of healing to make sure that your opponent can't get active Draconic Crushers, and they just can't go over the top of your taunts. Now, Mech Bear Cat is completely absurd if you don't have access to Big Game Hunter. It will usually give you 2 or 3 spare parts and kill 2 or 3 of their guys, which is necessary because you do not have Ancient Allure anymore. You need this consistent draw to the point when Azure Drake is a tech card, which you can run, and you actually have to run Nourish, in my opinion. You have to run Nourish for that consistent draw. Druid really misses Ancient Allure's punch. You don't have Ancient Allure, you need that draw power somewhere. So Nourish makes up for it a lot. Now, the Mech Bear Cat is another way of getting card advantage, and as I said, Azure Drake also functions as card advantage, as you can play him and get spell damage, and it also means your Swipe and your Wrath are more powerful, so Azure Drake is a very good 5-drop to have a look at. Now, in terms of other tech cards, you've got Starfall, Golden Starfall, very pretty card. You've got Starfall being an extra AoE, and the Recycle. Now, this is the biggest weakness of this Druid deck, and because the format's Conquest, it doesn't show up as much, because you usually run into an aggro deck of some kind, it doesn't show up. Recycle. Recycle is the only way Druid has of dealing with big things when they're behind on tempo, and a lot of this format comes down to tempo and then big things. Whoever is ahead on tempo and sticks a big threat usually wins. So you need a way of rubber banding, a bit like an Arena, but more structured than Arena. Way more structured than Arena. It plays a bit like Arena, but with a lot more aggro and a lot more solid control decks, because you can just build them from the ground up. But yeah, Recycle is almost necessary as a one-off in my opinion. I didn't put it in the core because if you're just building this to beat an aggro deck, you don't need Recycle. But you need Recycle to beat an active Draconic Crusher most of the time. You also need it to beat some of the stuff Priest can turn out that you just can't kill. You just cannot kill some of the stuff Priest can turn out, and it is utterly miserable. Now, a couple of things you can look at is Starfire as a bit of extra burn. I think I'd recommend running Recycle over it, but you can run Starfire as a bit of extra removal if you really would like to. Wouldn't recommend running Healing Touches, just run anti-heal bots. Mark of the Wild is a potential buff to throw on things that can really help with some of the neutral techs. Now, some of the neutral techs come in the 6-drop slot, because you only have one 6-drop. So you want an extra 6-drop, at least 3 6-drops in the deck, maybe even 4. So Draconic Crusher comes up again, but the deck is slower, so maybe not Draconid. Boulder Fist Ogre is the one you go to after that, being very, very powerful for the cost. Then there's Frost Elemental, which is potential. It has potential. I tested it a bit. It wasn't massively impressive, but it does have potential, especially in Druid, which has hard removal issues. But Boulder Fist may just be better for just how large it is. Now, one of the last major cards I want to talk about is Sunwalker. Now, Sunwalker is borderline playable and constructed. I've got it close to being playable. It usually ends up getting removed when the deck gets to high levels, though. Sunwalker is a very powerful card, very hard to get past, but it does have its weaknesses. Volcanic Drake is the other 6-drop to look at in this format, and in Druid I wouldn't recommend it because you don't have board wipes. So Druid, very powerful against aggro, does have some holes in it though against control and mid-range decks. Mostly control decks. Mid-range decks it can kind of deal with. Now, the last deck I want to talk about is what is in my opinion the king of the formats besides maybe Patron. I haven't really tested matchups with Patron. There's also a couple mage decks and shaman decks. There's basically a viable archetype for every single class, which is very nice to look at. So anyway, on to Priest. Now this is where things get interesting, because Priest has 2 things that most classes do not have. Ways of dealing with really big threats, and ways of creating really big threats. So Priest is very, very combo-y in nature, so you need to be more proactive. Now, one thing you do have to do this is buffs. You have Velen's Chosen, which is very, very powerful in this format, and Power with Shield, which is the best buff in the game. Then you need to run Circle Orkanite, because you don't have access to Light Bomb, so you have to run that. You also have Shadow Word Death, which is a very, very powerful card. I have as a 1-off here, but it's tacked 2-off if you want to. I would recommend running 2. I would recommend running 1 Mind Control, 1 Holy Fire for some extra healing and control of the big stuff. Pains, again, can be 2. Shadow Madness can be 2. Now, if you're running 2 Pains, I wouldn't run 2 Shadow Madness, but if you're running 2 Shadow Madness, don't run 2 Pains. Pick a combination of 3 out of these 4 potential cards and roll with it. Now, besides that, we've got Standard, Cultist, Holy Nova for extra AoE, and then the Temple Enforcers. Now, this is where things get interesting. Temple Enforcer is arguably the best 6-drop in Limited, besides Fire Elemental. Yeah, High Main is also very good. High Main, Fire Elemental, and Temple Enforcer are, in my opinion, the best 6-drops in Limited. There's also Mechbear Cat, which gets up there. Basically, class 6-drops in Limited are very, very strong. Temple Enforcer is one of the biggest in terms of swing effects and will often win the game immediately. You get Temple Enforcer on a big threat, you get his trigger to go down, and you basically win the game. Now, you may notice there's 7 cards missing. Now, the reason for this is because there's so many tech cards you can run. I mentioned a couple, but there's an insane amount of them. You can run Silence, so that you can just run Iron Recal if you want to, but if you run Wild Pyromancer combos, you can't run Silence. You've got Light of the Naru, because you're running Orkanai, you can tech that in. You can go ahead and run a bit of dragons. I wouldn't recommend it though, because you do lose all the late game legendary dragons, which Priest does depend on a bit more than Paladin. You can run Shrinkmeister as a one-of. One of my teammates was actually running Shrinkmeister as a one-of, and it does work because you've got Shadow Madness and Shadow Word Pain. Resurrect, surprisingly effective in this format because everything is generally larger. So you can, basically the smallest thing Resurrect hits is Northshire. Now Resurrect is not usually a good card for the reasoning that there's too many situational cards in your deck. However, if you added 7 minions to this deck, removed 2 spells and added 2 Resurrect, you'd end up with a 20 minion deck or something, and then Resurrect is always live, more or less. So you can pull off Resurrect as a combo card, and it works very, very well. Now, upgrade a Repair Bot, there may be some sort of Priest Mech build. I haven't really looked into it, but it is possible because Priest Mech is very, very good at making really big things, and that may just be very powerful in this format. Zombie Chow shows up as normal when it comes to Priest as a tech card. Didn't put it in as a core because I don't think it is a core card, but if you want extra anti-aggro, run the Chow. It's a very, very powerful card. In terms of 2-drops, not much to look at, quite frankly. There's Ironbeak Owl, there is Wild Pyromancer, and that's about it. Unless I'm missing something incredibly obvious, there really aren't any 2-drops Priest is very fond of. Now, moving on to the 3-drop slot, you do have Velen's Chosen, you have Dark Cultist, you could go for Spider Tanks if you really wanted to. Harvest Golems get up there a bit, running Earthring Farseers, because you have Orkanais, even Death Lords. You could even run Death Lords. You've got Velen's Chosen, after all. You can run Death Lords, you can run Little Exorcist, Mind Control Tech, forgot to mention that with Druid. So there's a lot of options at the 3-drop slot. Now as far as 4-drops, again, you're not really running 4-drops, so what do you want? Now you can run Yetis, you can run, Senjins or Pilot Shredders. You can run a Kazan Tech for Hunters. There's so many options, and this is why Priest is so good, in my opinion, is because you can run all these different options. You can run Shredder for sheer power level, or Senjin to buff up and heal up. I've even seen Twilight Drake being used to great effect, because if you have 7 or 8 life on Twilight Drake, you basically win the game, as Priest in this case. Anti-Keelbot is not necessary, but you can run it some effect. Bomb Lobber, again, some effect. Besides that, though, the 5-drop slot is reasonably empty. There is the ever-present Sludge Belcher, which I would highly recommend, and a couple last things here, Stampeding Kodo, and this guy. Now, Venture Mercenary is astonishing. He's very, 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 very good, because he's not weak to Big Game Hunter. Now, normally Venture does have a bit of a caveat to it, however, you're playing Priest, which means you can heal it up. You can use your mana on spells, and you can buff him up again and just wreck face with it. Now, Venture I didn't mention a lot of the other decks, although it is still good in those decks, because it does mess up your curve a lot when you're depending on minions to do your dirty work. In the case of Paladin, if you can't play your Corruptor because of Venture it's a bit awkward. Speaking of Paladin, be careful against Paladin when playing a Venture Mercenary if you're teching it in, because the Eldor Peacekeeper is a thing, and that will make you cry. Now, you can use Velen's Chosen on it, if I can find it, yeah. And that will put it up to a 310, which is still very powerful, or a 910, which is off the charts huge in this format, quite frankly. Now, the other 5-drop, which can be played, although I wouldn't recommend it, is Spectral Knight. Wouldn't recommend it because you can't target it with Villain's Chosen, your Hero Power, or Shield, but you can with Temple Enforcer, so pick your poison as far as that's concerned. Now, onto the 6-drops. A couple you can run. Draken and Crusher, wouldn't recommend, the deck's a bit too slow. Boulder Fist, nice high health pool, works very, very well with Priest. And Sunwalker, which you can buff up to give it a nice big health pool to work well with Priest. Besides that, Volcanic Drake, not the best in Priest, but you do have Vulcanized Circle to burst everything down. So you can get Volcanic Drakes out for 1 or 2 mana, even 0 if you're lucky enough. So some potential combos right there. Now, it may seem like I just walked through most of the neutrals and just say, play this, play this, play this. But to be honest, Priest, having tried it out in Limited, really is like that. I would say you could have 4 people playing Priest mid-rangey decks with this kind of core, and the 7 cards they choose, or even 8 or 9 depending on how they build the core of the deck. Like, some people might only run 1 Chosen, Villain's Chosen, because the second one's a bit clunky, which, yeah, you could say. I personally prefer power over consistency, but that's just me. So when it comes down to it, you could get 4 people playing this kind of deck, and the 7 or 8 cards would be completely different from each other. The additional 7 or 8 tech cards would be completely different, and you would barely be able to recognize them as being the same list. However, they'd all have that same core. So Priest is definitely the most versatile of all the decks we found. Patron is a bit set in stone, quite frankly, when it comes to Limited. You don't really miss many cards from Standard, and you can just fill in the gaps and it works. As in the case of Hunter and Zoo, not many gaps. But when it comes to Druid, Paladin, and Priest, from what we tested, it's definitely a diverse set of decks that you can fiddle around with. Now, in case of the other classes, you do have Mage retains most of their decks. Rogue, not really sure about. Shaman, I think is potentially very, very good. And I think I already mentioned everything else. So the format is starting to look fairly decent. Now, the tournament running tomorrow is limited. Now, the question is, depending on how well that goes, not in terms of like turn-up rate or anything, but in terms of just how fun the format is to play, and whether people like it, I may do a tournament recap on them, and we may continue doing limited tournaments. About a month from now, we'll keep doing voting, and then we'll just go with the most popular format that keeps getting voted in over and over and over again. We might just go with it and then change it up once every month or something. But we'll have to see. So the next voting phase, by the way, which I'll put out probably video on Saturday, I should imagine, or Sunday, knowing me. Probably a video over the weekend. I'll announce the voting, maybe go over a few of the deck lists if we do have any for the limited event, and put up the new poll, which will probably be Classic and Highlander. I may actually just leave Limited in there and just add Highlander in, and then maybe one other format, and just see which gets the most votes out of the 4. Make it not 2 options, maybe 3 or 4. Highlander, for anyone who doesn't know, is singleton. So you just run a deck with 31 ofs. And that would have some legendary restriction where you can only have 1 or 2 legendaries or something, so you don't get 30 legendary decks, because those are always weird. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below if you want to ask any questions. But if you want to check out the tournaments, I will have links to both the North American and the EU tournament pages, and you can sign up there directly. But anyway, Alice Analysis from Jotto, signing off.